you here today with us. I'm just giving it another minute to make sure that Facebook has really broadcasted this and that we have a few participants to join us on Facebook. And here with us on Zoom, we have a few guests as well. So I'm really happy to have Pooja and Shannon already, and hopefully we have a few more. So just giving it a few more seconds.
Happy to wait, and thank you.
All right, then. So let's kick off another exciting episode of Mentor Logs. My name is Ketki Sood, and I'm your host for the series. So Mentor Logs, as some of you know, is a dialogue and exchange that I have been having with experienced and very skilled mentors on various topics of mentoring. And these are meant to really strengthen mentoring relationships and provide hands-on tools to mentors. Today's topic of Mentor Logs is about building trust and really getting to know each other, which means the mentor and the mentee. And we will be discussing some key questions on why we need to build trust and how is it that we can build trust, but also what are some of the myths around trust. Trust is a very commonly used term, so I think we probably don't need an introduction on that. But before that, let me introduce our very exciting and interesting guest today, Jaba Sen Menon. I'm really privileged to be having this conversation with her. And before I invite her, I'd just like to give a short introduction. And of course, Jaba, then I will hand it over to you after.
You.
So Jaba is an executive coach and member of the International Coach Federation, ICF. She's also a leadership facilitator and mentor. Jaba has led people, businesses, and brands over a career spanning 32 years. She has held leadership positions in organizations like McCann Erickson, Publicis, One World International, and was the founding management board member of Centum Learning, a Bharti Group company, which has trained over 1 billion people during her tenure. Wow. She passionately addresses issues around waste of talent and human potential. Well, hopefully we are building human potential in our mentor log, and brings her diverse experience to consulting, coaching, and facilitating programs for clients in over 16 countries. Her clients include high performers from over 15 countries working with organizations like UNOPS, World Bank, UNFPA, World Aid, IOM, JPAL, University of Oxford, and many others. Besides that, she draws upon her own journey of complete transformation and spiritual practice to support her clients to discover themselves and their spark and achieve their life goals. I'm really excited to have you on this Mentor Logs, Jaba.
Thank you so much for a generous introduction. And I'm so pleased to be here. I've been associated with Thrive with Mentoring for a while. And it is all thanks to you, Shivangi, Valke, that I am here today. And I'm excited to be here. And thank you, Nupur, Shannon, Pooja, who are also joined us today, some of the guests that we have. And we are very pleased to welcome all the viewers who are witnessing this on Facebook. So very warm welcome to all of you.
Fantastic. So why don't we kick this off, Jaba, with a little bit of an introduction about the topic, which is trust, and why do you think trust is important in a mentoring relationship?
Okay, so trust, I would say, is the basic fabric for any relationship, and of course, mentoring relationship. And when you look at various surveys, whether it is the Edelman Trust Barometer, or whether it is the Gallup's Employee Engagement Survey, no matter what data you look at, or if you look at the current state of different economies, the dialogues between different countries, you see a huge trust deficit. And that is precisely the reason that because we cannot be independent of everyone, of every nation, it is so important to build trust in any relationship, whether it is between two individuals, whether it is between executives and supervisors in an organization, or whether it is between two countries. And of course, mentor and mentee is such a important, close, trusted relationship that trust is paramount in that relationship. So I would like to share just one slide to make a point, which I would like you to ponder upon while we are going through this. So give me a second.
Super.
So this is one of the quotes that I've taken from Stephen Covey to set the context, which we can all read, as to how trust is the glue of life, as he puts it. So it is the most, as I said, it is the most essential ingredient in effective communication, and communication is the basis of most relationships. So therefore, effective communication, and it is the foundation, therefore, of all relationships. And this is what I wanted to draw when you said why trust is important. This is the slide I wanted to get your attention to, because our distrust is very expensive. And how is our distrust very expensive? Let me state in a couple of ways as to how our distrust is so expensive. One, the first and foremost, what comes to my mind is that it raises the level of certain hidden inner chatters in our mind very strongly when we don't trust. And those can be called, in more technical terms, our saboteurs. So whether we have taken a saboteur assessment or not, which is also available for all of us to take and see what our saboteurs are, but the ones that connect to lack of trust is hypervigilant. And a hypervigilant person is always foreseeing what could be threatening to one's life. And to live out our life in that manner, always feeling fearful of the other person that we are engaging with, can be a very stressful way of living. The second thing that comes to my mind is there is yet another saboteur, which calls controller. So if we are a controller, then we would like to control each and every one, how they behave with us and otherwise, and how it affects us, which is not possible. And we would be so terrified of delegating any tasks to our mentee, not if we didn't trust them, and if we wanted to control as to how they would do the homework, if you call it a homework between two sessions. And that's not how we can go on in any relationship. So whether it is the saboteur of hypervigilant, whether it is the saboteur of controller, or simply creating psychological safety. If you read what makes Google, and it always is one of the greatest places to work in, and I'm sure all of us would love to be associated with Google at some point in our life, in our career, because it is a great place to work. And what makes it a great place to work? What makes it a great place to work is simply psychological safety. So what trust does is to build that psychological safety between a mentor and a mentee, so that the mentee can afford then to speak their truth. And unless they speak their truth, a mentor and mentee relationship would be totally ineffective, just like any other relationship. And obviously, we are referring to many other such examples, like if you see the approach of what are the building blocks of following humanistic management principles at our place of work. One of the building blocks is clearly trust out of the three. So we can imagine the importance of having trust in any relationship. So I hope I have answered your question as to why is trust so critical in starting off a mentor-mentee relationship.
I mean, your points were super valid, Java. And I think, I loved how you brought that into light, not only from an individual perspective, but then also to relationships, organizations, and at the world level. So I think that is super clear and super important. I think that we recognize that. What I loved is also the point that you touched upon when you talked about people being hyper vigilant or fearful, right? And I think in different cultures, we see that people live out of fear, especially when they are dealing with others who are maybe perceived to be higher up in the hierarchy, right? So it's it's really a perception. It may or may not be the reality. And especially if you see in terms of within organizations or within, as you talked about, countries. So there is some, I think in some cultures, the hierarchy becomes evident, and hence the fear becomes the dominant factor in a trusting relationship. I don't know what your thoughts might be about building trust in those kinds of situations.
So I would like to take it, I'm sure some of you are familiar with a concept in psychology, which comes from transaction analysis. So even if you're not familiar, I would like to borrow from that one single example as to how it affects hierarchy. So you were talking about hierarchy in different cultures. You were talking about hierarchy between countries, which means superior, inferior. Somebody is superior, somebody is inferior. And that's the role that is never going to change. That's here to stay. But what can change is, and that is true even between a mentor and a mentee to some level. A mentor is usually older, more experienced than a mentee. So while the role can be hierarchical, what need not be hierarchical is our interaction from an adult to an adult. So basically, when I say I borrow from transaction analysis, I'm drawing upon the ego states that we talk about, which is not what we understand in the English dictionary ego, but it has the parent, child, and adult ego state. So if I am not looking at my mentee as a child and me as the parent, and can establish a relationship of an adult to an adult, and the same thing between parent and a child, same thing between two countries who may be economically, politically, first world, second world, third world, etc., where the hierarchies are so evident, that's not going to change. But what can change is our interaction between two role holders who are perhaps in terms of their roles are not equal, but in terms of their ego states are completely equal. And so it is a power with relationship that we are talking about. We are not talking about a relationship which completely is detrimental to building trust, which is a power over or a power under, even with our own children. In fact, all the lessons of my trust, but from a mentor-mentee perspective, I think has been learned in a huge way from my relationship with my own 23-year-old daughter. So the relationship and the building blocks of building trust don't really change whether I'm a supervisor in an organization or a mentor in a mentor-mentee relationship. And if I can always stay in the adult space, which is not emotional, which is balanced, which is fair, which is logical, we will always develop much more trust than otherwise. So that is what I feel on that topic.
And very interesting, because I think that's a tough one, especially, I mean, you rightly talked about, we see that with our own parents, and then of course with our children, for example, as well. And I think, I'm sure, and this is something that I experienced, for example, that even when you're not a child in the way of definition of being less than 18, I mean, and once you grow older than that, for a parent, it's a very difficult change that comes about much later in life, but it does come about, where now the parent sees the child as an adult. And I think that's also where I see, for example, between the mentor and mentee, that's where I think the mentor probably has to play a bit of a larger role there in trying to come to the level of the mentee. I don't know if I'm being so clear, but I'm trying to say that they need to be at the adult level to be having this conversation. Absolutely. Rather than the parent and the child, I would imagine.
Right from the stage of contracting, when we contract a relationship with the mentee, that is where the clarity needs to come in, that it's not as though I will play the role of a parent. We are on an equal footing where our responsibilities towards ourselves, where our learning, where our growth, where our advancement is concerned, we take equal responsibility and walk that path of mutual trust.
Absolutely. So that brings me to a very interesting piece around mentoring. And since Thrive with Mentoring is, dedicated more towards mentoring of women, do you think that women find it easier to trust other women mentors?
I would certainly think so, because of many logical, rational reasons. That this model in many organizations, one of them that I work with, and one of them is, of course, Thrive with Mentoring, where we have exclusive women coaches or women mentors for women employees or mid-level, where they're in their mid-level career, and women mentees. And it makes imminent sense. And why does it make imminent sense? One, clearly a women mentor becomes a women role model for a mentee to follow. They have similar experiences. They do not get subjected to the biases or the stereotypes that a man might have because I am a woman. So because she is a woman, in fact, there was a study which was done by a CEO who had two mentors, mentees, one man and one woman. And in a television interview, he was asked, now that you have two mentees who are of two different sex, if you were to delegate a very key task of yours, who would you give it to? The spontaneous response was the man. So there is a stereotype, there is a bias, there are enough elements for women because of our history, because we have, this came our history, the biases and the social construct that has emerged. It is already there when we were born. We didn't create it. But at the same time, we do suffer from the consequences of that. So therefore, when a woman doesn't have to battle, a woman mentee doesn't have to battle any of those forces, when she can have a frank conversation as to how to navigate office politics or how to understand insights about what is happening at workplace, I think she's likely to trust a woman's experience and women's way of navigating far more than she would do with a man. And also the difference is that no matter where you are in the world, to say that men and women are playing 50% role everywhere, whether it's in the household or whether it is at the workplace, that's not true. A woman has to work much harder to prove herself at the workplace. That is true even today in all countries. It has nothing to do with developing world versus the developed world. And because it is that way, the work-life balance, the element of self-care, the emphasis on self-care, the emphasis of not being seen as being too aggressive, can come more genuinely from a women mentor than a man mentor, is what I think. And I think I'm pretty convinced from what I read and what I see in the world. And I'm totally convinced that it is much easier for a woman to relate to another woman in all these areas, whether it is the work outcome, whether it is her career ambition, whether it is her work-life balance, whether it's drawing work-life balance, or whether it is navigating office politics. She is far more easy with a woman mentor than a male mentor.
So actually, you touched upon a very interesting topic, because I feel like, the reason why a woman would engage in mentoring is because she wants to progress in her career. And I agree with you with the fact that, yes, a woman mentee would prefer a woman mentor for various reasons. And I think that could also be personal. But the reality sometimes I feel is that, there is a level, which is the glass barrier that all women face. And this could be something, for example, the mentor may face in her career. And I would imagine that for the woman to break that glass barrier, they need to have a mentor male to be able to then rise higher. And what comes to my mind is more about, for example, this PepsiCo CEO. And I remember reading about her, and her example being, she would not have been the CEO if she didn't have a mentor and sponsor who was a male, because, as you know, the corporate world is more male dominated. So it's just a reflection and a thought. And of course, I think all of us are kind of evolving in our thinking on this topic, but I would imagine that at some stage when we hit that glass barrier, what is it that will enable the mentees to cross that, to surpass that? And I think that for me is just a reflection.
That's a very interesting one. And I'm wondering about Indira Nui, the fact that she had to, in today's day and age, still we see the number of women in a boardroom, the number of women in senior leadership positions to be so few in number as compared to men. There is enough and more logic in believing that if men had the benevolence and if men had the care and compassion to treat women fairly, even in mentoring them, we would see far greater numbers, because I really don't believe that there aren't capable women in the world. We are still talking about women hitting glass ceilings, and we are still talking about very few, handful of women sitting in the boardroom, handful of women, you know, the 7 women or the 9 women which were talked about as political leaders handling corona cases out of 192 countries. There are 192 countries, I think, and there are 7 or 9 women who are being celebrated for handling corona cases very well. Isn't that a reflection of how our male mentors have mentored women and helped them break the glass ceiling? So
absolutely, yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think it's, I don't know what the answer is. Is it care? Is it compassion from the men? Because I mean, everyone's perception of care and compassion can be very different. It's also individually perceived. And sometimes I also get the impression that, you know, you have to come to the level of the other person if you want to gain from them. And again, I'm coming into this hierarchical imagination, but the point is that to be able to convince someone, you need to speak the language of the other person. And I think in negotiation as well, this is kind of a given rule, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, it's just another angle to be able to build that trust between women, but also thinking about growing further, succeeding in your career, for example. What would make more sense? Or even in relationships, for that matter. I mean, being a partner to your life partner, for example. But yeah, some thoughts, or we could even move on.
A controversial
Yeah.
topic, but I would still stand by my conviction of women being a better women mentor than to women than you know, men. I'm not denying the advantages that you may have being mentored by a man. I'm not denying the advantages of that. It's only a question of cost benefit analysis and what we see happening in this world. We have not been able to in so many years build a more inclusive, safe place for women in workplaces. And to be handing over our life to the very same men who are very much responsible for this phenomena, I don't know how wise that is.
Sure, as you said, it's an interesting topic. I think we should continue that. But let me come back to building trust and some of the myths that you've seen that exist around building trust.
Okay, so some of the myths around trust that exists in our mind, I think in most minds, is that trust is a soft quality. Even when we take a leadership position, even when our own mentees take a leadership position, I wonder how much attention we pay to building trust, thinking that it's a soft quality, but it's really not. It's one of the most valuable assets of any leader. So that is one. The second one that comes to my mind is trust is not static. If I trust you today, Ketki, 5 years down the line, I may or may not trust you. So it has to be continuously built. It's a dynamic relationship. So it's not a static, even within a family, trust is not static. So this is a second myth. The third one that I can talk about is that a lot of us go out to the world believing that trust will take time, building trust will take time. Not really. Once the trust has been broken, it will take enough and more time to rebuild trust. But does trust really take time to build? I don't think, from my coaching and my mentoring experience. Because if we know that the mentoring or coaching, especially a coaching experience, because I also am a coach is a coach-coachee relationship is of a limited duration. It's never too long. Mentoring relationship can be longer than a coach-coachee relationship. So if we were to take too long to build trust, we wouldn't be able to progress to the next second and third session. And perhaps most of the time we are just doing 8 to 10 sessions. So therefore, that is one of the myths that we need to shed, that building trust takes time. Trust can be built immediately. But yes, once trust is broken, to rebuild it, it does take time. The other one that I can think about is that trusting is risky. And we saw it in the diagram, that how much more expensive is not having trust. You cannot really move forward in life being fearful and being doubting the other's intention towards me, over which we have no control whatsoever. So therefore, I think trust is not risky. Not trusting is very, very risky to my mind. And of course, the other thing that we often think is trust is all about competence. So when we come to the trust building model, we'll see that no, it's not all about competence. There are many competent people in the world who are failing their employees repeatedly. Some get reported like the Lehman Brothers and some don't. And in India also we have several such examples. So without naming anyone, I would say that it's not all about competence, because of their competence, they reached such levels where they had thousands of employees working with them. However, there was something more needed to maintain that trust where they completely failed. And those organizations, some have wound up, some of them are in a very bad state, some of them are being reported in the media every day. So irrespective of the degree of trust, they have failed as a leader. So trust is not all about competence. And the last bit that I want to emphasize upon is sometimes we think trust is intuitive. But I think if you think about it, trust in a relationship has to be created. It's not all about intuition, and it's a two-way street. When I talk about a mentor and mentee, I'm constantly referring to a relationship where I need to be trustworthy and I need to trust. There are two sides of the same coin, being trustworthy and being able to trust someone. So I think some of the myths that come to my mind about trust are around these areas.
I really loved the fact that you talked about how it's that trust doesn't need time necessarily. And I really love that idea. And I actually want to ask you about how, maybe from your personal examples as well, within a mentoring relationship or otherwise, how have you managed to build that trust? And probably in some instances it was faster than others. So just to kind of reflect on what that really means.
I didn't get the second part of the question. You said passed on there?
It could be some of the relationship you managed to build trust faster than the others. And
okay.
What has been your reflection on in what kinds of situations or what kinds of people were you able to build trust faster?
Okay, so I think where my own personal example goes, whether it's as a coach or as a mentor, there are two. One is the psychometric assessment tools which exist, which also tell us something about trust. And I would borrow from those because those are facts, not my perceptions. And I would also apply a perceptual filter and tell you how my own experience has been. So one of the first things that I want to talk about when I recall my own experience, it's about modeling vulnerability. So if I cannot model vulnerability in a relationship, I cannot earn trust. So I have to brace myself each time with the mentee to first demonstrate my own vulnerability without expecting the other person to open up. And the second part very clearly is being myself, being my real self. And let me state in one or two more sentences what I mean by that. My real self, my authentic self, doesn't mean really that I need to bring all of myself to this session, for example. I will only bring what is relevant to this session. But what is relevant to this session, I cannot afford to be inauthentic. So in a mentor-mentee relationship, when we are meeting for the first one, two, three sessions, I don't think it is about bringing all parts of our life. We don't need to show up with everything that we have, but we do need to show up very authentically with what is relevant and contextual to that meeting. Third, I said I'll draw upon some of the psychometrics. So some of the psychometrics are interesting, which actually says, and I'm borrowing from Hogan's, I'm talking about the Hogan, the tool that we sometimes use, the Hogan's, and what does that tell about us? So I think that states a couple of things in my favor. One of them is high on prudence. Because I'm high on prudence, I carry the advantage of being responsible, having an eye for detail, planning meticulously. These perhaps are some of my advantages which build up trust. And although my sociability score is low, that I'm not a very social person, my interpersonal skills of empathy, of being sensitive to others' needs, that I score fairly high. So and there are certain derailers that Hogan's brings out, which are extremely important perhaps to gain the top leadership position, but which does not help you retain those leadership positions, because you need certain attributes to become a leader, to enter the boardroom, but the same characteristics don't play out very well when you have to sit there meetings after meetings, because there it is a question of trust. So what does help is that instead of being too loud, instead of playing out my bold, colorful self, I play out a more humble self, because that helps in building relationships and that helps in building trust. So authenticity, compassion, unless it is demonstrated, now I'm coming to something else which is also related to Hogan's evaluation of interpersonal skills, and which is about excessive orientation on self. If in a mentor-mentee relationship, it is all about myself, how well I'm doing, how well my goal is being achieved, how well is my agenda being met, everything is about self, then the trust is always low. Because one of the key principles of building trust is to be less self-oriented. So if that comes to us naturally, it is always a help. And if that has to be cultivated, which is also great, we don't need to have everything, we can cultivate some. And all of them are actually very much easy to cultivate once you are mindful of it and once you are aware what to step up in a particular role. So these are some of the things which come to my mind, which is about building a good mentor and mentee relationship. And when you say what has been easy and what has been difficult, I would also put some onus on mentorability. I'm coining that term, mentorability of the mentee. So the the mentee also has to be equally willing to open up, be curious, be willing to experiment with new behaviors, not just understand, because you can't do much with self-awareness unless you act on it. And no mentor or no coach can help you act on it. You have to do it yourself. So while we can build self-awareness, the onus of being a mentee to be able to experiment and come back is something that I feel is also depends on how mentorable is the mentee.
Very, very interesting point, I have to say, I think. And I'm curious to understand also some people on Zoom and also for those on Facebook, if there are any questions, we're very open to hearing from you. What are your thoughts? What are some of your reflections as well? So feel free to write them in on the chat on Facebook or here on Zoom as well. So that brings me to the point about, in the situation that you've talked about before, that distrust or not having trust is actually more expensive. So do you have some instances from your personal experiences where the trust broke down between the mentor and mentee, and what were some of the measures that had to be taken to repair it?
Yes, not all relationships have worked in my life. So I can certainly draw on the instances where a mentor, mentee, or a coach, coachee, or a supervisor, I'm putting it in the same order, because after all, they mean the same. A supervisor and a reportee, how the relationships can sometimes become dysfunctional. So one is a clear case of absence of contracting. When I'm using the technical term contracting, all it means is, because I'm again drawing from transaction analysis where we always talk about contracting, all it means is having clarity about the roles and responsibilities that we will be, not just roles and responsibilities, also at a psychological level, how will we interact with each other? So a clear contracting, how will we bring up an issue which is not working? When will we bring up? How is my response expected to be? Once I have clarity around these areas, I will not be fearful about raising it. So one is clearly at the beginning, and it cannot be done. Of course, contracting can always be modified, but as much as possible, it is extremely crucial to have clear contracting with the mentee, because otherwise absence of clear contracting can make a mentor-mentee relationship dysfunctional. The other thing that comes to mind is lack of boundaries. If there are no clear-cut boundaries, and if I don't seek permission, even if I think it is in the interest of my mentee, if I cross my boundary without seeking prior permission, it is possible that the emotional damage is so much that it becomes irreparable and the relationship becomes of distrust and becomes dysfunctional. So again, lack of boundaries and respecting boundaries is one of the key aspects of building a good mentor-mentee relationship. Then, of course, some of the obvious ones are the breach of confidentiality. In all such relationships, confidentiality is sacrosanct. So therefore, any breach of confidentiality will make a mentor-mentee relationship dysfunctional. Then, as I said, if it is not an equal relationship, if it results in some kind of bullying, advice is different from bullying. But if I am trying to push my agenda too hard, and if it comes across to the mentee as bullying, the relationship is damaged to a large extent. Then there is also a question of, I would call it mentees benevolence. So the mentee to appreciate the fact that mentor is also fallible. I can also go wrong. And as I said, in terms of vulnerability, while it's my responsibility to own up that I went wrong, maybe I overreacted to something while she was while she was stating a particular situation, maybe I overreacted to something. Possible. But I would call it the mentee's benevolence to understand that although I may play the role of the mentor, but I'm also human. So that is again another aspect of this whole game, that we understand, we have an understanding to be able to respectful towards each other. And the most important one is that if I don't have the belief in my heart that it is for the mentee to take the best decision towards achieving his or her goal. So if I cannot trust the mentee to be able to do that, if I don't trust the mentee to be whole, to be completely aware of what works in her life, then again, the relationship can become dysfunctional, because then I'm taking a higher ground that I know better about somebody else's life, which is never the truth.
So really fascinating, because I think these are such deep thoughts, if you really come to think about it. And I think all of us have probably had instances when we've seen or been between relationships or with our mentors, for example, where you might think that they have made a mistake, but and if there is trust, then I think the mentee can also have a conversation with the mentor, saying and talking about this and saying, I understand, and I also understand the larger context around why you might have behaved in a certain way or why you might have said a certain thing. And I think that goes back to the piece that you talked about around transactional analysis, right? Where you have an adult to adult conversation. And the other piece that you really mentioned, where, the mentor also needs to understand the fact that, well, the answers lie actually with the mentee, right? And the mentor's job is really making sure that either providing examples from their personal life or asking the right questions, which is the right way of going about the relationship, right? And I think the once the mentor trusts that it's the mentee who has the answers, I think that could also accelerate the relationship in terms of building trust as well.
Totally.
And that actually, another point that I was thinking about, well, we are living in Corona times now, and we have a screen now in front of us all the time, 24/7, more so to speak. And we get to meet people much lesser. And yet, in that context of being in front of, a 12 by 14 or whatever be the size of our screens, trying to build trust like this. I don't know, Jaba, for you, how has it been for you in terms of being able to build trust? Do you see a difference, first of all? And if you do see a difference, how have you gone about kind of, developing this trust on the screen?
Okay, so I will take my personal example and also tell you what I feel in general. My personal example tells me that the fact that you read in my introduction that I have been able to coach and mentor and facilitate sessions in so many countries. I have not physically traveled to any of them, even when there was no Corona. It was all online. So the fact of the matter is that the Corona has not really changed except the physical sessions are not happening. But other than that, my reaching out to people from different cultures, from different countries and different time zones, nothing has really changed, because that's how I was working, especially in the last 3 years. So therefore, I think it is about the general principle of building trust. Does not change whether it is online or whether it is a physical one-on-one meeting. And I would like to share a slide now, which talks about the general principle or the model that I think is very important for building trust. And that, if we are able to be mindful of those cornerstones of building trust, it is equally relevant whether we are in the digital space or whether we are in the offline space. So is it more difficult? Well, personally, I haven't experienced it. I think people can only come to the second session once they trust you, and they're trusting you online because of certain reasons. And what are those reasons? I would like to share my screen for 2 minutes before we move forward. We have another 15 minutes, right?
That's right. And we also have a question, which I will ask Pooja to unmute later.
Okay, so I'll just give me 2-3 minutes and I'll do some screen sharing.
Fantastic.
Okay, so when you talk about building trust, in the interest of time, while I won't go in great detail, but I would like you, and I would like you all to think about this. What is our intent when we meet someone? Is it to restore our own identity? Or are we doubting their competence? Or are we interested? My intent is to connect or correct. There are two different intents, even with a mentee. Do I want to correct her or do I want to connect with her? So therefore, when I'm with a mentee, these questions I need to be very clear so that my inner chatter is not telling me something else. I need to be very aware of my inner chatter, and I need to be directing my inner chatter instead of getting consumed by my inner chatter. So therefore, I think these three questions are important to answer. When I talk about this enabling 1 shift, I'm doing it online, whether I do it online or whether I do it offline, my constant endeavor is to make that 1 shift. And what do I mean by that? There is a plastic surgeon who refers to this 1 shift. When he talks about beauty, he says, if A is equal to B, which is the perfect, then the person is beautiful. If it is 1 less, the person is average. And if it is 2 less, the person becomes ugly in plastic surgery. So it is to enable just that 1 shift. Am I constantly focused on that goal? If I can bring about through a trusted relationship, by being a trustworthy mentor, if I can bring about that 1 shift in my mentee or coachee, my work is done. So going forward, it's actually a 3C formula. So the 3C formula is about character, compassion, and competence. So it's a combination, and it starts with propensity to trust. Am I able to trust? So I have an interesting anecdote to share here. Once I went to my doctor and I asked many questions about the medicines that was prescribed to me. And the doctor answered every question patiently. And it was in a state when I was not emotionally well. I was physically all right. I was not in an emotional good space. And the doctor asked me in the end, I can understand why you're asking me so many questions. Do you trust yourself today? And that stayed with me. This interaction must have happened about 15 years ago. I realized that I, in that emotionally unwell state, was not trusting myself enough. So I had to ask so many questions to the doctor about each medicine, though I am not a doctor myself. But I had to understand so much because I was distrusting of the doctor, just the way I was mistrusting myself. So the first is the propensity to trust. If I don't trust myself, if I don't have a healthy connection with myself, it is always very difficult to trust. Therefore, from the propensity to trust, if I have these three things in place, compassion, character, and competence, I'm done in building trust to a large extent. And we can elaborate more on each of these three, but I think we will take questions instead of my going into elaborating the elements of the character, elements of compassion, competence when we're talking about behavior, compassion is more about feelings. So I would avoid going there now unless there are questions. And I love this slide because see how the two are trusting each other. So this is one of my favorite slides in trust. It is just a representation of pure trust. So this I have said earlier, trust in self equals trust in others. So we have to fight our own gremlins, our own fears, our own exaggeration of risk in our own mind to be able to trust the other person. And it is not to say that we can't be slightly skeptical, not to be fooled by anybody, or we don't want anybody taking advantage of us. But at the same time, the trust in self by fighting our own saboteurs, by trusting our own ability to deal with every situation, if something goes wrong, enables us to trust others. So that is the equation that actually holds very true in my view. And of course, that's the last slide. I'll stop sharing this slide and I'm happy to take questions. There are still 10 more minutes. I'm happy to take questions.
There is a question, and I'm taking that before Pooja because it's related to what you just said, Jaba, about, you know, trust in self equals trust in others. And Sonia Robinson is asking from Facebook, you say that I can trust myself and hence trust others. Is that so?
Yes. So we trust perhaps the elevator and the escalators more than we trust ourselves sometimes. And if you really look deep within, that is the case for many, many women and men across the world. I wouldn't make an exception for men. Our self-esteem, our self-trust, self-esteem is different from self-confidence. First, let me draw that clear, boundary there. That self-esteem is not equal to self-confidence. And self-esteem, our own identity, belief in our own identity, belief in our own self, trust in our own self, can sometimes be easily lower than trusting an elevator or trusting, we won't bat an eyelid before getting into an elevator. But before trusting our own decision, before trusting our own ability to handle difficult situations, that's another matter altogether. So yes, I do think that trusting, if I can trust myself, I can trust the other person better. Absolutely.
Great. Sonia, sorry, go for it, Jaba.
No, I said more and more easily.
Okay. And Sonia, if you have further questions for Jaba, I'm sure you will find her on Mighty Networks or also on LinkedIn. So yes, Jaba has shared her details, contact details on the slide, and I'm sure that we can continue that conversation. I just want to invite Pooja now to probably, if she can, come on the camera and maybe go on unmute as well to ask the question that she has posted here.
Hi, Ketki. So the question for you, Jaba, is borrowing from the ICF competencies of coaching presence, how can this kind of a presence that we're referring to be used by the mentor to build a trusting relationship? And would you like to share more about this presence in bringing out the authenticity and vulnerability for a mentee?
Okay, it's an interesting one. So the basic, when you talk about presence and connect it to trusting, which is again fundamental of starting off a relationship with a mentee, as to how do I use my trust and how do I leverage my trust to be 100% present to the mentee in that session. So one clear thing that 2 or 3 things come to my mind. One is I would be far more present if I can empty myself of all thoughts, biases, about the person, the stereotypes, which just come subconsciously to my mind. If I can be aware of that, because they might still come, but if I can be aware of that and shed it, I will be in a much better place. One of the things that can make me present is to be conscious of the biases, of honestly accepting that this bias exists, and so that I can be mindful when that bias arises in that session and be completely present. That's one. Second, how can I fully trust that the process will work? There is a process that we follow in any mentoring or coaching. Instead of being excessively worried about the outcome, if I can, that also requires a certain element of trust. And the third and the foremost one is, do I trust myself and the mentee to be able to do full justice? It's a 50-50% relationship. So do I trust the mentee and myself to be able to do 100% justice to this particular session? If I am confident, I will not let that worry occupy my mind, because many a times I am worried about my self-performance. If I don't reach the desired outcome that the mentee has laid out for the session, it puts so much stress on me. I have to relieve myself of that stress, and I have to think that I have all the competence, I have all the intent of supporting my mentee, and I have all the care for my mentee to be able to get there. And I have to relieve myself of this and trust my experience, my competence, my character, my authenticity, and be 100% present to the mentee. If something else occupies my mind, then I'll not be able to be 100% open and present to the mentee. So I will remove these, if I can remove these blocks through whatever ways, by working on myself, I would be more successful in being present to the mentee. I hope I've answered your question, Pooja, connecting trust to presence for the mentee.
We have another question from Shannon this time, and I will invite Shannon now to come off mute and maybe, yeah, super. So Shannon, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time and creating this space. It's pretty cool. I enjoy these very much. My question is a little awkward or weird, I think, because it comes out of left field supposedly, but actually you've spoken, Jaba, to a lot of things that I'm dealing with as an entrepreneur. I started my business finding a need or seeing a need for Indians who are speaking directly to Americans to find some kind of common ground, or to get to a place where that hierarchy doesn't exist, at least for that moment when they're trying to either sell something or just communicate. There seems to be that kind of a hierarchy. They feel that Americans are somehow superior or they should be put on a pedestal, or at least that's what I've noticed. And I was lucky enough to have a position in a BPO where I could teach those same Indians that, listen, that's not the case. And in fact, we're all human and we can all relate on some level. And so what I did was I gave that that confidence through little insights and a little bit of advantage to build that trust in a very quick amount of time. Usually when you're selling something, you have about 15 seconds to build enough trust to be able to keep them on the phone or keep them face to face with you. And so, so how I taught them, or what I taught them, was to, Americans love to talk to them about themselves. They absolutely love that. They also like talking about the weather and things like that. So I gave them those insights. I taught them how to ask those questions and how to relate, and that built trust very quickly. So my question to you, knowing that I've for the last 3 years built my business on this basis, how do you prepare for sessions that you are that you're doing and executing in different countries?
Okay, good one. So firstly, I think if I go back 20 years, I was still making more than 20 years, 25 years, when I was with McCann Erickson, and I was making presentations to clients in the US or in other countries, or let's say Switzerland, where Nestle is headquartered. So anybody, and I'm using this term quite deliberately, anybody with a white skin, I thought subconsciously, not consciously, that they were harder to please, and I must up my standards. So I think if this racial construct, what you referred to, is again a reality, that because of the color of our skin, we tend to put not just Americans, but anybody with a white skin as somewhat superior. And I find it funny when people say, oh, you speak such good English. And I like, what a statement to make when India is full of English medium schools, and we learn English from the age of maybe when we were 3 or 4. So coming back to your question, I think that is, I won't call it, this is a phenomena which exists. There's no denying that we are somewhat, we feel intimidated, and immediately at a subconscious level, we come down to, even if there is no hierarchy, we build a hierarchy in our mind of superior, inferior. And it happens so quickly within that 15 seconds that you said, that we are not even able to catch it that we have gone there.
That's right.
So my advantage, and I'm talking about my personal experience, I think over a period of time, as my own confidence and competence has grown, and having dealt with people from different countries over many, many years now, I have been able to conquer it to some extent. So therefore, when I'm sitting in the place of a coach or a mentor, my subconscious mind does not get intimidated by the color of the skin any longer. Only because I think in terms of experience, and as Ketki mentioned, it is 32 years of experience behind me. It is a certain level of natural competence that one has achieved. And it is my preparation for each session. I don't take a single session for granted, whether it is for an Indian client or an overseas client. So a lot of preparation, and my certain of my, as I said, as I talked about my psychometric advantages, while there are disadvantages as well, I am only talking of my advantages. My certain skills of interpersonal skills and prudence helps me overcome this bias in my own mind. And when I'm able to do it subconsciously, then it's easy. But it hasn't happened naturally. I think there are cases that could still intimidate me, but so far going is good, fingers crossed. So that's my secret, I think, about being able to coach and mentor successfully in many countries, irrespective of their skin color.
Fantastic, Jaba. Thank you very much. Shannon, we probably have to take this offline now, but I really appreciate your question, both Shannon and Pooja, and thank you everyone who has joined us today. I do want to mention that our next mentor log is planned for October 15. with Lekha Shishta, and we will be talking about being present. So anyone interested in that topic, please do join us. But most of all, I want to thank you, Jaba, for being an amazing expert on the topic, and clearly it's evident how much experience that you've had, both in the areas as a mentor, but also in terms of advising and sharing your experiences with others like now. So really appreciate your time and effort, and also thank you very much for joining us today on this Mentorlogue.
Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed, and it is my privilege and honor to be on this platform. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I really treasure it.
Thank you, everyone. And we do have a pan-India cohort for Thrive with Mentoring. So if anyone is interested to be mentored with people like Jaba, and we have a huge panel of other mentors as well, then do register. We will be sharing more details on Facebook and other social media. So thank you and bye-bye.
Thanks and bye-bye. Stay safe and wish you all the best. And thank you for joining in.